Kosovo's uncertain future, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Doug Savage, Assistant Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM, filling in for Rob Rosigliano. When the former Yugoslavia fell apart, sovereignty passed to its constituent republics. Kosovo, however, remained a province of Serbia. In 1990, Kosovo's ethnic Albanian leadership declared independence. Tensions with Belgrade quickly escalated, and by 1998, Serbia and the separatist Kosovo Liberation Army were in open conflict. In 1999, following NATO airstrikes against Serbia, Belgrade agreed to withdraw its troops from Kosovo. NATO ground forces were positioned there, and an uneasy peace, punctuated by sporadic violence, has prevailed since. Last July, at Russian insistence, the U.S. and European Union redrafted a UN resolution on Kosovo, replacing a promise of independence with a pledge to review the situation if there was no breakthrough after 4 months of talks with Serbia. That deadline is about to pass with no settlement, and Kosovo's Albanian leaders are weighing a unilateral declaration of independence. With the report of the so-called contact group, composed of the U.S., United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Russia, due at the UN, we're taking a closer look at the situation. What's driving the conflict? Who are the parties involved? And what will be the consequences for Kosovo and the region if independence is declared? To help us understand this potentially explosive situation, we're joined today by John Katzka, a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer who has conducted public diplomacy for the Department of State on 4 continents, including service in Serbia, Kosovo, and Macedonia. John, welcome back to International Focus.
Thank you.
Well, I think I'd like to begin by setting the stage a bit. I think many people have a sense of the U.S. involvement and the Clinton-era NATO actions, but obviously the story starts a lot further back than that. So I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of the historical background to this conflict.
There's a saying that, I can't remember who the author of the saying, it said that the Balkans are too many people from too many different ethnic backgrounds in too small a space with too long a history. And it clearly is true even to today. Historically, the area which is now Kosovo has been a pawn amongst a variety of states. It goes all the way back to the Greek Macedonians who were involved. The Romans had control over it for a period of time. The Bulgars had control. And the Serbs, amongst the other southern Slavs that moved down into that area, really had it at its birthplace. And Serbs are very proud of a particular battle, the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, in which they lost the battle but killed the Sultan, and they lost their prince, who became a saint, Saint Lazar. So the issue is very complicated. The history is very long. I was in Belgrade in 1989, 87 actually, and when they celebrated, actually 1989, when they celebrated the 600th year anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo. And it was used by Milosevic, who had come to power 2 years earlier, as a driving point in the resurgence of Serbia within the Yugoslav state. Tito died in 1980. And it took 7 years before anyone in Yugoslavia was prepared to deal with the fact that he was no longer around. They went through this little masquerade of having all of these rotating leadership. And Milosevic, for largely internal Serb political power bases, upset that little ritual and challenged Serbia's role within the leadership, and was probably the instigator of the fall of Yugoslavia.
Well, a lot of the current situation turns on the formal political status of Kosovo vis-a-vis Serbia. So could you walk us in a bit more detail through sort of the post-World War II history?
Sure. Serbia controlled all the territory from Kosovo up through Vojvodina. When Tito came to power after World War II, he, as a Slovene and a Croat, was not interested in seeing the re-emergence of a Serbian-led Yugoslavia. And so he started the process of separating out the Vojvodina, which is the northern part of Serbia. And if we could flash to the map, you could see that particular piece up there. And Kosovo as on the southern part, which is the area in red. It wasn't formally made autonomous until 1974, 6 years before his death. So that there is this general appreciation within the world that that Kosovo was semi-autonomous. Well, that was only recent. But there is no question that the migration of the Serbs out of Kosovo was escalating all the way through the 50s and 60s, and by the 70s there were only enclaves left in Kosovo. And after the war, a lot of the Serbs left as well. The Serbs, Montenegrins, Gypsies, who were on the wrong side of that conflict.
So what roughly would be the demographics currently then? Just in broad brush percentages.
I would say 90% Albanians, maybe 80 to 90% Albanians, and the rest, the majority of the rest would be Serbs/Montenegrins.
Okay. And you know, you touched on this a bit earlier, but what were the changes wrought by the Milosevic era for Kosovo?
Well, in order to take over the party apparatus in Belgrade, he challenged the Serb leadership over what they were doing for the Serbs in Kosovo. And he achieved power as a result of that. But what he did is he ignited the spirit of the Serbian people, and they were largely behind him. I used to give dinner parties in which we could have very erudite people would sit around talking very openly and broadly about a lot of topics until we got to Kosovo, and then all of a sudden the shutter went down and there was no possibility of anything but what Milosevic was doing to regain Kosovo for the Serbs. So he rode that wave. The fact that Tito had kept that pressure cooker so blocked up for so many years meant that this was just one of the ethnic issues that was exploding in the former Yugoslavia.
So then if you could recount the sort of U.S. and NATO involvement under Milosevic that really set up the current crisis that we're in. Let
me also back, if you will, on the historical side. Part of the problem is that it's not just the fact that it's the birthplace of Serbia that makes Kosovo important. There are extremely important Serbian historical churches there that go back to the 12th century, and also the religious minority that is there. I mean the Serbian minority that is still resident there. Unfortunately, and I did visit a number of these places, they are all in little enclaves, largely with NATO troops surrounding them to protect them from the Albanians on the outside. Backing up to your question about where we were, we decided that there was one bad guy in Yugoslavia, and that was Milosevic. And I think that's correct. But there were also other bad guys. Tudjman in Croatia and Izetbegovic in Bosnia-Herzegovina were also bad guys. All of them were working to push their own agenda. All of them were involved. And also the Kosovar Liberation Army were bad guys in this process. A number of the leaders of the Liberation Army were involved in narcotics trade, in human trafficking, and some of that still goes on today.
So then, as we mentioned in the in the intro, there was a declaration unilaterally of independence,
Right.
and a ratcheting up of tension between the Kosovo Liberation Army and the Milosevic government. And at what point did the NATO intercession begin?
Okay, I was in Russia at this time, so I was involved in all of the wonderful things that were happening after the fall of the wall and the ouster of what? My goodness, we've lost his name. The leadership of the Soviet Union at that time, and so I wasn't following this as closely as. But we, again, going back to, we picked one enemy, one bad guy. So we set up a process in which to get the Serbs, to get the international community to back a program against Milosevic, and this was conducted in Ramouet, in France, in which we presented the Serbs with the option of either you give independence to Kosovo or else. And there wasn't any. Again, it's the same issue it's confronting Belgrade right now. There isn't a Serb leadership that's going to endorse independence for Kosovo and give up and be responsible to the Serb people for all time for what they have done. And that was true then. They walked out of Ramouet. We felt that we had the upper hand. We pressed for concessions out of Milosevic. It was ratcheting up, and then the bombing started.
Mm-hmm. So we got about a minute left then. The bombing ultimately resulted in withdrawal of Serbian troops, and where did that leave the status quo that we're faced with now?
Well, I was in there shortly after the bombing stopped, and it was a disaster area. All of the industry was destroyed. Kosovo is not a particularly well-endowed area, and the only area that has any resources is an area where many of the Serbs are, up in Mitrovica. And therefore, it was a complete disaster area, providing any element of support for the people who flocked back in, largely from Macedonia.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop you right there. We'll pick up the story with where we find ourselves now. Our viewers will be back in a moment with International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking about Kosovo with John Katzka. So, picking up our story, the NATO bombings compel Milosevic to withdraw his troops, and what was the political situation at that point?
Well, shortly thereafter, Milosevic was relieved of his power. I happened to have been asked to go into Belgrade right about that time. He was under house arrest when we arrived in Belgrade to try and resume relations with the Yugoslavia, as it was still called. And the Yugoslavs who were in charge felt that they were not responsible for Milosevic, and they were not prepared to make any concessions regarding Kosovo. The leadership there, regardless whether they're moderate or orthodox or conservative, are all pretty much lockstep on the issue of Kosovo, and that you can't, for political reasons, ever give this up. Mm-hmm. So we began the dialogue in discussing how they were going to come to grips with this thing. And quite frankly, there were, for the Albanians who were in Serbia, Yugoslavia, there were programs that were set up. We helped finance some of this in southern Serbia, which actually leads into this larger question of how does Kosovo fit into as an issue in terms of the whole of the former Yugoslavia. If you like, we can go. go to
we'll
that?
get there. Actually, so we find ourselves now in a situation where talks began, and there was a UN resolution initially that was sort of leaning towards independence for Kosovo, which was redrafted at the insistence of Russia, that said, all right, what we will do is talk for 4 months.
You really need to back up a little bit because the 9/11 occurred, and after 9/11 we began gearing up for Iraq, and the Balkans went off of our radar scope. I was no longer asked to go back and do troubleshooting in the Balkans. All those resources were going into the Middle East, into Iraq and Afghanistan. So we pulled back to a degree. We were still involved with the Europeans, but it largely has become a European-directed process. They have much more to gain and lose as a result of what happens in the Balkans.
Mm-hmm. So now the scheduled round of talks is about to expire, and clearly an agreement is not forthcoming.
No.
So there's a report due to the UN by this contact group, after which time there are certainly considerable numbers of people within Kosovo who say, well, we've tried and now it's time for our unilateral declaration. So what are the scenarios following this upcoming deadline?
Well, the EU, the US, and Russia have participated in talks with the Serbs and the Kosovars. And all have agreed that nothing has happened as a result of this. Russia still wants this to be kept in the province of the Security Council. Russia has several reasons why they're interested in supporting Serbia. It's a fellow Serb, it's a fellow Slav country. There are historical ties. There's the issue of precedence in this, and this is something where China also has a strong interest in that, giving independence against the wishes of the state that controls a particular province sets up alarm bells, not only in Russia, not only in China, but the Greeks are concerned about the Albanians. The Spaniards are concerned about the Basque. The Romanians and the Slovaks are concerned about Hungarians in their countries, the minorities. And so there's a great deal of concern broadly about what kind of precedent this sets. On the other hand, Russia, if it decides that there are stronger interests, bigger interests to be served, could just jettison the Serb issue. I mean, I don't think it is one of those that it is going to fall on its sword over. But this is a wonderful way in which they can reassert themselves internationally without any great cost.
And what about the Georgian issue in terms of Russian relations?
Sure,
Does that play into this at all?
Well, it also plays out into the Muslim Orthodox, Muslim Christian relationships. Even though Kosovo is a highly secular society, it has the label of being a Muslim country, and this just plays in Russian minds into Chechnya and Abkhazia, and also and whether or not there is going to be a greater Russia or just the Russia we know today.
Mm-hmm. And what historically has been the U.S. perspective on independence?
I don't know that we have. I think we tactically adjust to these things. If you were to objectively look at the situation as it stands on the ground today, it would be hard to say that Kosovo does not deserve to be able to deal with its own future. Now, Serbia has been willing to give greater autonomy, and that's been one of the points that they've made, but it's not clear, it's not nearly as much as what the Kosovars want. And it's also, it isn't really an issue of creating a greater Albania, because I don't think Kosovo has any intention of becoming part of Albania. If anything, from the Kosovars I talked to, they would see it the other way around, that they would absorb the other Albanian communities. And that's, if we could go to the map for a second, that brings us to the issue of where are the Albanians outside of Kosovo. And there is a significant population in southern Serbia. If you look on the map at that southern part of Serbia there, you will see there's a valley that runs down there called the Preševo Valley. And there are probably 100,000 Albanians in that area. And then in Montenegro, there is a significant Albanian population. So it really, and Macedonia, which is the most endangered of them all because this has the largest Albanian population, and there has been warfare between the two groups within the recent years.
Well, I'd like to touch again on the situation with Georgia, because I think it's an interesting one. Georgia's State Minister for Conflict Resolution, when asked about this situation, recently said, and I'm quoting here, "I'm not worried about Kosovo, but the misuse of Kosovo."
Exactly.
And what do you think he means by that?
Well, this is exactly what the Spanish are worried about with the Basque, because there is a piece of Georgia that wants to break away, and I believe it's Abkhazia, that wants to break away from Georgia and become part of Russia. And the Russians have, there's talk that the Russians have been playing in that playpen with the Abkhazi and with the Georgians. So it's just one more manifestation of those several examples that I gave you. And
if you're in the Oval Office now, what do you think should be U.S. response to a possible unilateral declaration?
I would be calling the EU and saying, what are you going to do about this? And I think that there is rumors that the EU has a plan, and they would like to, working with the Russians, to the degree that that is possible, transfer this from a UN plan to an EU plan, and to set up a rigid program of rule of law, civil society, all of which they've been trying to do all these several years in Kosovo with no great effect, and to impress the Russians, not worrying about the Serbs, to impress the Russians that they're doing the right thing, and then at some point in time next year move towards independence. I don't know how much truth there is in this, but it does strike me as a possible option. There is also talk about partitioning of Kosovo, and having wandered around that place for several months, it won't work. The places where the Serbs are located are so widely spaced, where the monuments are so widely spaced, that you couldn't have a contiguous connection point so that you could take a piece of territory.
And is there anything approaching a unified EU position at this point?
I would say that it's going to be very complicated. I cited the Greeks, the Romanians, the Slovaks, the Spaniards, who are very concerned about precedent. The Italian foreign minister was just saying, let's not proceed too quickly with independence on this. There is concern amongst a number of EU leaders as to how to proceed, and the EU does not have a singular foreign policy. It still goes back to the member states in terms of determining and voting on whether or not they'll agree to this particular thrust.
And well, having placed you in the Oval Office, if you're now an advisor to the
EU,
well, the EU, and then we'll go from there to Kosovo.
There is no good outcome to this. It is very difficult to see how this is going to end without conflict of some sort. Both sides are so strongly positioned in terms of what they see to be right that there's just no room for compromise at this point. So I would say my advice to the EU is keep talking, keep working, but don't expect big results. My advice to the new Kosovo Prime Minister, Hashim Thaçi, would be careful, move slowly, make sure you're not cutting off your nose to spite your face.
And what do you think really would be a worst-case scenario, assuming there was a unilateral declaration?
Well, the best thing about it is that the Balkans, at this point in time, aren't as important as they have been, or they might be. Therefore, a lot of this can happen in somewhat of in isolation. Whether or not this spills over into Bosnia and the Serb minority there decides to go for independence, whether the Albanian minority in Macedonia goes for independence, this is yet too far down the road to be able to project. But those are dangers that apply to this thing.
Well, John, I will spare you the hot seat question of what will happen after December 10th. And,
thank you for that.
And I thank you for joining us. To our viewers, thank you, and we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.